Hi, everyone. This is Emily Packer, and this is my Positionality Project for EDUC 604, Education and Globalization. So I've organized this project around 3 different teaching contexts that I've been a part of over the past decade. And then within each context, I talk about the intersection of education and globalization, and I bring in ideas from this course, as well as topics from the article we had to read for this project. But before jumping into each of the contexts, I wanted to bring attention to the power and privilege that I have brought to each of my teaching positions and my role as a global citizen and ESOL educator, both domestically and abroad. We can look at the Wheel of Power and Privilege by Sylvia Duckworth. I know that it's not entirely comprehensive, but I thought an image might be a little bit more powerful than just me talking. So I took some red stars and I put stars next to all the identities that describe me. And a few of them I want to pay particular attention to before we move forward with the presentation. So the first one is wealth. And so I am middle class. I was able to afford to go to college and then eventually graduate school. And here we are in our PhD. I was also able to afford to study abroad and then live and teach abroad. And so my socioeconomic status gave me a lot of power, power of options for where I wanted to go with my life. Paired next is my citizenship and skin color, as well as I'm going to add language. So these 3 gave me an enormous amount of power when I was getting started with my career. And that's because my first position in Xi'an, China, I would have not gotten it if I had not been a white American English speaker. So I definitely want to bring attention to this before moving into the rest of the presentation. Okay, so let's talk about my teaching position in China. So when I was in China, you can see I have a picture of me in the top right-hand corner. This was a flyer that was passed out in Xi'an. There's about 5,000 copies distributed throughout the city. This was done without my knowledge, and this was done because the school I worked for was actually completely a business. And I won't call him a principal, but I will call him the owner. The owner of this was privately owned and operated, an English school outside of Xi'an. So in the neighborhood, nobody spoke English. And for this owner, the more Westerners he had, the more students he attracted, and then the more money he made. So I was extremely marketable, which was when I realized this was why I got hired instead of just my professional ability. It was a big blow to my ego, but I was very marketable. I was white. I had the quote American accent. I was slim and pretty in his eyes. So when I applied for the position, I had to send a full body shot as well as a close-up headshot. And then throughout my time in this position, I saw my boss evaluate potential candidates and turn those away based on skin color and body type. So in this position, I was a member of a company. And although I didn't realize that at that time, I thought this was just a normal way of teaching abroad, which it is due to globalization. The school functioned as a highly profitable organization within the capitalistic market in China, creating a need and then filling a need for those in the community, despite not necessarily having the need to speak English. So this was when I was first aware that my ability to transfer knowledge about my own language and culture to students, regardless of its relevance, because it wasn't relevant, and their level of assimilation afterwards, so vis-a-vis tests, had monetary worth, and not necessarily to me, while that's true, to those who run the school. So I was able to position English language teaching specifically, and then broader education sector within the market and globalization pushed by capitalism throughout the world. So this is when I first started reflecting on the statement that I was trained to believe in. English is a skill that's needed. And this is when I started questioning, is this true? And then for what? So my second context is the ESOL and community colleges pre-COVID. I was an ESOL instructor. So during this time, I saw ESOL as a barrier in the reproduction of colonial practices. So this was pre-AB 705. So ESOL students, when they applied, still had to take standardized placement tests, which were extremely inequitable. And then they were placed into subsequent levels. And these tracks were very long. It could take students years to complete them. Within Within these classes, English only was the policy, and there were lots of barriers that students and us part-time faculty faced, like the deficit viewpoints of tenured professors who upheld linguistic imperialism, very Eurocentric curricula, or in particular American-centric, United States-centric curricula, wrought with inequitable assessments like in-class timed essays. And we saw a high dropout rate of ESOL students. So this is when I realized, hey, the way that English is being taught and the kind of English is being taught is harming. It's not helping students. And it's deeming brilliant students as failures, which is a huge problem. So again, going back to English as a skill that is needed, what have we as instructors been prepared to really do? Is it to provide knowledge and guidance, or is it to uphold the status quo? And what are the students being prepared to do? Are they being prepared to be enlightened, or are they being prepared to go into certain positions after community college based on their English level? That brings us to context number 3, which is the same context, just during and post-COVID. So within COVID, we saw a lot of inequities come to the surface due to the switch to online education. So this is a picture of me taking a selfie because nobody showed up to my Zoom classes for a lot of different reasons the week after we switched to online education. So there are so many barriers. There's access to digital tools, the ability to navigate the digital world, the skills, access to a quiet and safe environment, inequitable requirements like cameras on, the cognitive overload of technological tools, and the instructor issues such as their technological ability, their presence, and the quality of education. And what I saw is that my Latinx students, which usually is the largest population of students in my classes, dropped significantly. And during our policy class, I was able to find literature that supported that. So what we learned from this is that online education and the inequities students face are drawn along, the inequities that students face within online education are drawn along racial, linguistic, and socioeconomic lines. So truly in 2022, digital literacy and access to the digital environment is absolutely a civil rights issue. It's a human rights issue. So again, English is a skill that's needed, but who is being excluded by online education and what harm is being perpetuated through online teaching and learning? So I made a list of all of the ways that I can enact change towards social justice within my context. And this is like 1/6 of the list. And so these are actions that I have taken, I am taking, I should take, I could take, and they range from very bottom-up actions, very localized actions within my classroom, to looking more at the systemic issues. So, hey, let's look for a push for the dissolution of deficit-based language, such as non-native and ESOL. Hey, let's use no-cost accessible materials. Let's make learning relevant to the students. Let's provide equity and ESOL training support to colleagues who are non-ESOL. Let's challenge systemic inequities that we see, use our voices. So there are so many of these actions that, again, I have been taking, I am taking, I could take, and I should take. So to provide the opposite side of the coin, let's talk about the barriers of equity in this context, though. It's not to provide an excuse, but just to show what's pushing up against these actions. So first of all, the contract worker, the American We Need article talked about this, but the majority of community college instructors are contract. There's no safety in this position. There's a lack of autonomy, fragility of the position. We're not included in decision making, and we are absolutely disposable. So we also don't live in the same communities as our students for the most of the time because we're at so many different schools. There are course requirements that we do not have the power to change, department requirements, institutional requirements, and then the leadership oftentimes, or maybe not oftentimes, but in my experience, has a deficit view of students, particularly students from specific countries and students who speak specific languages. And this is a colonial mindset. This is upholding linguistic imperialism. How far away are you from the ideal white American English speaker? And that's where the discrimination comes in, the bias comes in. And lastly, an important barrier to address is the goals of students, which are largely driven by the ability to take tests well, like the TOEFL or the IELTS. And although educators are moving away from teaching to a test, and sometimes the courses I teach don't even address the tests, students want to make sure that they are prepared for these. And that's because these tests are seen as a golden ticket to universities and jobs. So within these contexts, we see capitalism, we see globalization encroaching in our local classrooms despite our best efforts. So one more time, English is a skill that's needed, but is bottom-up change possible? And what does resistance look like? And this resistance is what I'm going to be exploring in my research. I'm so excited to dig into this more. So as a final thought, I've talked about Motha a lot in previous presentations, but this is a quote from her speech that just resonates with me so much. And it says, I realize that I'm feeling a little squeamish about this enterprise. I'm trying to come to terms with the non-innocence of my work, the work that I first took up because I was going to make sure the world was a better place, like many of you, I'm sure. And I'm finding myself wondering about the degree to which we as English language teaching professionals participate in creating a market for English and feeding desires for English through our practice, textbooks, advertising, curriculum, and policy. So helping to produce a lack, which we then move in to remediate. Aren't we the heroes? I mean, I'll be honest with you, I feel very conflicted about academia and about the field of TESOL. So thank you so much for listening to my presentation and my positionality, where I am right now and what led me to where I am right now. I'm still struggling a lot with the barriers, the institutional barriers within my specific context, but I'm hoping that some of those changes that I am making and will be making can disrupt those. So thank you so much for listening.